Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as we're now in the period where Rishi Sunak could, in theory, call the election at any time, I'd like to explain why, although I still think May the 2nd is the most likely date for the election, the Tories would be better off going to the polls even sooner if possible. Only there's a little bit of a problem, and it's related to their own Rwanda Bill. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I've said in the past that the Rwanda Bill, the whole Rwanda plan actually, has backfired on the Tories. It's a little bit like Brexit, not quite on such a grand scale. It not only highlighted the Tory failures by their own measures, but it allowed Reform UK to have something to say. And now they're nicking a load of their votes. And now I think the Rwanda plan is even making the best landing zone for the general election impossible. And this is because despite a few things happening which turn the dial one way and then another, I think a spring election is still the most likely. It makes no sense for the Tories to hold that election later than May the 2nd, but before May the 2nd would be even better for them. In Sunak's ideal world, or shall we say least rubbish world, he'd be calling the general election today, this week at least. But I think I'm safe in publishing this video because I don't think he's going to. It's really this simple. There are two intrinsically linked negative features for the Tories of holding the election after May the 2nd. First of all, as I discussed earlier this week, they're going to get absolutely spanked in the local and mayoral elections, which are happening on May the 2nd regardless. Worse than anything else that's befallen them so far. Not only are the party at their lowest level of support for decades, but the Tories did well and Labour badly the last time many of these council seats were up for grabs. If the general election has still not been called, a significant number of voters will turn up to those local elections and use their voting power to send a very strong message to the Westminster Tories. I don't think that message is going to include hugs and kisses. Whereas if the general election has been called, there's no real need to take it out on your local councillor. Voters can express their disappointment with Sunak's pirates on the general election voting form and then use their local election vote based on the performance of their local council. And this is one reason why May the 2nd is the most likely date. The other is that the Tories have been struggling to get activists out and about for, say, by-elections, and they're also going to struggle for much the same reasons to get them to turn out for the general election. I mean, it's a big ask to get people knocking on doors, and particularly the knocking on doors, because you get quite a lot of abuse if your party's not very popular. It's not very nice. So it's quite hard to get them to turn out, particularly when you're as unpopular as the Tories are now. But they will turn out for the local elections, because that's about their local councillors and candidates, for whom the public may have much higher regard than the Westminster shower. So holding the general election campaign at the same time as the local elections means that activists can turn out and do both jobs at once. Put it this way, if the election is in autumn, the Tories aren't going to struggle to get people knocking on those doors and delivering those leaflets. So May the 2nd then. Well, I would argue that an earlier general election would be better still. Why? Well, if the local and general election is on the same day, you may well get a much higher turnout in the local elections because people will be voting in the general election anyway. It's not really very much more effort to vote in the local election. It's in the same place. It's a slightly different form, but you do it at the same time. It's just an extra stroke of the pencil on that slightly different form, which means you're going to have a load of people who wouldn't normally bother voting in the local election suddenly now doing so. Is this a problem? Well, not for democracy, no. I'm all in favour of more people voting. But the sort of people who would not normally vote in a local election are unlikely to base their vote on local issues. After all, if they don't think local issues are important enough to vote when there isn't a general election on the same day, then yeah, you're going to have a load of people voting in the local elections along the same lines as the general election. And those are not lines likely to favour the Tories. So it would be better to hold the general election in April, actually. That way, you still get activists out because the campaigns overlap, but you have a general election. It's done and dusted before the local elections. And once they've been booted out of government, voters no longer feel the need to be mad at the Tories in the local elections. So the local elections can be voted on by those who care about the local issues and base it on the performance of their local councillors with a much smaller share. You'll always get some, but a much smaller share of those with Westminster thinking. And ordinarily, I would say this would be the best bet. This is why I'd have almost been expecting Rishi Sunak to announce the election straight away after the budget. It's why I say that now the budget is out of the way, he really could call it at any time. Could be today, but I don't think it is. The huge spanner in the works is the Rwanda Safety Bill. Sunak surely can't call the election and have Parliament dissolved before it's passed through Parliament. He's got no justification for that if he's claiming it's important legislation. So he has to wait for the bill to pass into law, or for the Lords to make it clear they're holding it up. The media are working on a confident assumption that it will pass into law on March the 20th, which suggests that behind the scenes there's some sort of deal being done, right? So it's not going to pass beforehand. So the timing would be quite tight for calling an election before May the 2nd. It might just be possible to do it for, say, April 25th, if you're going to insist on having it on a Thursday. Of course, it would also come with severe criticisms. It would cost more money because it'd be like, well, why don't you just hold it the following week and you know, rather than have the polling stations out 2 weeks in a row. It would be difficult to justify. It would look dodgy. In isolation, especially given that the budget sounds better than it really will be on people's lives, it hasn't even sounded all that good for most people. The Tories would have been better issuing the budget and then announcing the election immediately. It would have also, apart from anything else, sort of toned down the media's reporting of how badly the budget is hitting various groups of people. And it would have given Labour less time to work on alternative proposals, assuming they haven't already done so. And if it weren't for the timing of the Rwanda Safety Bill, I actually think they might have. I certainly think April would be the best shot for the Tories. If they could have announced the election this week, not only would they give Labour the least amount of time between budget and having to publish their own spending plans, but they could hold the election 2-3 weeks before the local elections. And given that the country are desperate for a general election as soon as possible, I don't think that would attract any great level of criticism. Certainly not to the same extent as holding it just 1 week before the locals. So their own Rwanda plan potentially bites them on the arse again. It's not often the case that a government becomes the architect of their own downfall. Usually, you know, the fail is because they simply don't handle the politics of what is essentially an issue outside of the government. You know, we had Gordon Brown, there was the banking crisis. John Major, Black Wednesday, was also Tory sleaze, but even that was sort of outside of his government. It wasn't a policy of his. Callaghan was due to the winter of discontent. Ted Heath, it was because he wouldn't agree to work on electoral reform with the Liberals. All of those failing prime ministers have to take responsibility for their own failures, of course, and most of them did do. But the pressure ultimately came from outside of their government strategies. That's not the case here. Brexit was government policy. Partygate was not exactly government policy, but it was spearheaded personally by the head of government. And the Rwanda plan was also government policy. It was a policy which identified a problem and deliberately came up with a solution which could not possibly work. And now it's biting them on the arse. It's helped Reform UK find a platform where they were struggling for relevance. It's helped trigger almost as much division in the Tory party as Brexit. And it's now making it all but impossible for Sunak to call the election while the polls still show the Conservatives will win some seats. Still, never mind. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.